You're listening to SK Max Sessions podcast series. Here we discuss pro audio, video, and lighting industry news, product reviews, host special interviews, and more. Be sure to subscribe and leave us a review. Here are your hosts, Jeff Mullen and Michael Waskovich.
Welcome to another SK Max Sessions podcast. I'm your host, Michael Waskovich, and I'm here with my co-host,
Jeff Mullen. How's everybody doing out there today? This may be one of our best guests ever, Mike. I know we tend to say that every once in a while, but this one is special. We've got two very special guests today. The second best guest first. It's Perry D'Angelo, our boss. It's always good to have him on here.
I would like to think he's our first.
Well, I don't know. The next guy,
in all deference to Michael, who I love dearly, and we grew up together at Shore, basically.
Yeah, that's true.
Bro, I send you a thank you note every 2 weeks.
Our top guest, Mike. I'm going to let you introduce him. So why don't you let everybody know who he is, and then we'll kind of go from there.
Well, yeah, we have two folks on the line with us here today. For one, we have the owner of SK Mac, Perry D'Angelo, who was on a podcast with us just a few weeks ago talking about the history of SK Mac. Yep. But speaking of history, we have with us on the line here today Michael Pedersen, who is historian at Shore, and he is a wealth of information in regards to anything that has to do with the history of Shore. And in celebration of SM58 Day, we thought, what a better way to celebrate than to bring the expert himself, Michael Pedersen, in to talk about the history of the SM58. Because I have heard him talk about Shore products many times over the years, and it's always wildly interesting. And it's just kind of crazy just how much history goes into these products, especially with the SM58, which nowadays is as ubiquitous as it gets. But on the other hand, the mic certainly was not a blazing success right out of the gate. It had quite a history behind it. We just wanted to talk with him about what it is that this mic really kind of went through over the years. And,
An interesting side note, I think I read this recently somewhere, that very soon in the next 2 or 3 years, Shore is going to recoup the R&D money on the SM58 finally, and maybe Michael can shed a little light on that, because I know it's been a little tough. Anyway, welcome, Michael. Thank you for spending some time with us here at SK Mac, and Perry, thanks for joining us as well. I know you and Michael go way back.
We do indeed. I can remember Perry and I think Bobby was there playing jarts in the front lawn of my apartment way back when jarts were legal.
Yeah, I was going to say, you could tell that was a while ago.
When people remembered what they were.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's right. Thanks, guys. It's always a treat to be with you guys, and I'm looking forward to this. I think you got a lot of great questions lined up, and just fire away and let's have some fun.
Well, I guess to start, why don't you tell us about your history with Shore and how you became the historian there? That sounds like a big position.
Yeah, well, I started at Shore in October of 1976. I was in sales originally. Eventually became a regional sales manager, but I was really not cut out for sales. I mean, I remember specifically being on a sales call once and wanting to tell a dealer all about these cool new products, and all he kept saying to me was, "How much money do I make?" And I just realized that this was not the thing for me.
Things haven't changed.
Yeah.
Of course it hasn't. But I wanted to talk technology, and he wanted to talk profit margin. So that was it. So around 1981, I got into product management, and I was the product manager at Shore. Some products I brought out as product manager was our FP line, our field production line of products, our automatic microphone system, our AMS system, a lot of different things. And that was fun. I enjoyed that. But product management wears you out after about 10 years. I mean, it's just a very stressful job. For a short period of time, I did what was called advanced product planning, which is just looking at new technologies coming down the pike that we could use. And then in 1993, I started our applications engineering department. We didn't have an apps engineering department at the time. And I remember that software was getting big there. And I was thinking one day, let's see, I got 3 different software programs that all do word processing. Which one am I going to buy? I'm going to buy the one where I get the best support from the factory. And I thought, why couldn't that apply to microphones as well? So started application engineering in 1993, Now, of course, that's run by Gino Sigismondi with 14 people. I can honestly say it's turned into one of the biggest sales advantages that Shure has over his competitors, which I'm quite proud of.
Yeah,
I would agree.
Agree.
So around 2016, here's a situation I find myself in. I'm getting close to retirement age if I want it. Gino's ready to take over the department. If I stay in that position, he's going to get frustrated and leave, and I don't want that to happen. And that's very important when it's time to step aside, you got to step aside. So I was thinking about, what am I going to do? My wife had just retired. She didn't want me home all day, that's for sure. I said, well, maybe I know what I'll do. I'll step back. I'll work for Gino 3 days a week as an application engineer. That might be kind of neat. Well, something happened. And that is, I had gotten into the Shure history by creating the 2-volume, 400-page history book. By the way, a little side story on that. In 1996, I wrote a little note to Mrs. Shure that said, our 75th anniversary is coming up in the year 2000. Why don't we create a 20-page pamphlet about the history of the company? Well, the 400-page book is the 20-page pamphlet. But Mrs. Shure and I worked closely on that, and that's how I got really interested in the product and the history and putting the archives together and so forth. Anyways, you may remember Mrs. Shure passed away in the middle of January 2016. And about 2 weeks before she died, I hadn't seen her for probably 6 months because she wasn't coming in. She was quite ill. About 2 weeks before she passes away, I get this phone call, and I can see it's her home number. Wow, this is strange. So I pick it up, and it's her secretary. And she says, Mrs. Shure wants to talk to you. And I said, well, great. So I say, hello, Rose. And she's on oxygen, and she's very weak. And the gist of the conversation was, she says, Michael, I'm not long for this world. I can't imagine the company without you. And when I'm gone, it's up to you to carry on the history. Will you do that?
Wow.
Man. What are you going to say, right?
So you said you'll think about it.
Yeah, so I think I'll get back to you.
That's going to run into money, Rose. Okay.
Right.
So
I'm going to need a parking spot. Okay.
So Krisha Vink, our president, said, she said, I think this is really a great idea, but I don't need any more direct reports. And I said, I understand that. So I said to her, why don't I report to Mark Bruner? And she said, that's exactly who I thought you should report to. So that's how it started.
Nice.
And, this is the best job I've had. I call it my 5th and final career. But fortunately, we don't have a mandatory retirement age. And I'm going to continue doing this as long as my health holds out because it's just too much fun. And I discover new stuff literally every week.
That's very impressive. That's a great story. It really is.
Absolutely true.
We're certainly here today to celebrate the SM58. It's hard to imagine that at one point this mic wasn't around, but because it feels like it's been around forever. So, it was first developed as a studio microphone, hence it being called SM, but it wound up making its history as a live sound reinforcement handheld microphone. Can you talk about how in the world it made that transition, like what the genesis of the 58 was?
One webinar I intend to put together eventually is going to be entitled, I don't know what I'm going to title it, but the idea is products we brought out for A and ended up over with B. I cannot tell you how many times we've had things we say, look at this, and the world says, no, it's like this. And we go, yeah, that's what we meant, really. And the SM58 is a perfect example of that. In the early 1960s, first of all, hi-fi is huge. And Shure is making money hand over fist by making phonograph cartridges. Build it for $5, sell it for $50. Yeah, we love that, right? And the sales department loves it and so forth. But we don't have much of a presence in studios. TV studios, radio studios, and recording studios. And in the 60s, the big players back then were RCA, AKG, and Electric Voice. So Mr. Shure gives a guy named Bob Carr the assignment to basically, one man operation, get Shure products into studios. So Bob says, well, we got to design a bunch of new products. No, we can't afford to do that. So Bob gets the idea of taking existing Shure products and basically repainting them gray, taking off the switches, putting on XLR connectors if they had Amphenol's, and making them all balanced low impedance, and then calling them something new. So he calls them the SM line, the studio microphone line. And he takes probably 5 or 6 existing products we have in our standard line, and then basically, puts a new coat on them. And that's the SM line. So the SM58 came out in 1966. So it's 55 years old this year, and was aimed at radio and television studios. In fact, the first magazine ad we ran It says nothing about sound reinforcement. It's all about studio. It's all about television work and so forth. You probably know the answer to this, but I'll tell you, I'll answer it anyway. Our first year, want to take a guess about how many SM58s we sold our entire first year, which would have been September 66 to August 67.
I don't know that answer, but I have an idea. But I think you might have made up for that.
Yeah, we sold
probably daily.
We sold
hourly.
We sold 145.
Wow.
So yeah, right. Ooh, wow, that's really great. That's not even one per sales day, right? Anyway, so it didn't go very well, and it gets around 1970, and none of the SM microphones are selling very well around 1970. And our vice president of sales, a guy named Ray Ward, who was a big hi-fi guy, and microphones were just kind of an annoyance to him. He says, well, Bob, none of these SM microphones are making their forecast. I think we should discontinue the line. We've given it 5-6 years. And so there's this big meeting held, and my eventual boss, a guy named Roger Ponto, who's the national sales manager at the time, and hired me 6 years later, says, well, Ray, before we give up on this, let's take these SM microphones, particularly 57 and 58, let's take them to Las Vegas. There's a lot of big showrooms opening up there, and let's see if they work for live sound. Well, what do you know?
So how'd it go?
It went well. So it really took us, we didn't actually cross over the 1,000 units per year threshold till around 1972, maybe.
Wow.
So
That's
here's a microphone. Yeah, so here's a microphone introduced in 66, 6 years later, and we're barely selling 1,000. So it did not take off. In fact, I would, you can never really tell. You look at the curves. It's really the late 70s and early 80s when it started to take off. And we finally hit our 1 millionth around 1995, 1996, something along those lines.
What was there one moment that launched that microphone, or was it just a series of occurrences that got it to?
Yeah, I think touring sound had a lot to do with it. Clare Brothers. I don't know when Clare really started working as a big firm. You guys would know they're in your territory, but I think a lot of the touring sound started doing it, and just a lot of groups started using it. Though I tell you one thing, there's one thing that kind of put the SM line on it. This was the Monterey Pop Festival, 1967. All the front line and all the back lines were SM56s. Pretty much all the big groups at the time were there. The Byrds and Buffalo Springfield and Mamas and Papas and Jimi Hendrix. And that's really kind of what put the SM microphone line in front of the big performers. The 58 took a little bit longer to get there. But there wasn't one specific thing that made the 58 take off. But also, Nashville started to get big for a music place. I mean, it always was big, but then they started doing Opryland and so forth. And there are a lot of things that came together, Perry, to just kind of worked in our favor.
I remember hearing you tell a story once, and maybe I'm confusing it with another microphone, but wasn't there an attempt to get Frank Sinatra to swap out, what was it, an SM53 or something he was using?
No, that was me. And that was, this is me being wet behind the ears. So it's 1977. I'm in Las Vegas with Roger Ponto for one of the first trips, I came from a family of blue-collar workers, and I remember my uncle who worked in a factory all his life saying to me, now they pay you to go to Las Vegas and talk about microphones? Yes, Uncle Conrad, that's exactly what they do. So Roger and I are out in Las Vegas, and this is 1977, and we're still pushing SM microphones. But now we got the SM59. Perry probably remembers that. I bet you Jeff or Michael have no memory of that.
Yeah, that one creates
I don't know that one.
Well, look it up sometime.
There's one in our bookcase.
It's a flat response mic, kind of with an elongated grill. Doesn't have a very good output level, and it really was our response to the flat response dynamic microphones that Electric Voice had. So we're trying to push it, and Roger says, "Hey, Sinatra's rehearsing over at Caesar's Palace this afternoon. Take the 59 over there. Talk to Dave Rogers, who is the house sound man. He'll get it on Sinatra's rehearsal, and we'll see how it goes." Okay, boss, I'll do that. It's the equivalent of saying, "Yes, Mr. Clapton, I know you've been playing Fenders all your life, but tonight I want you to use a Gibson," right? You just don't change things like that. But I didn't know, right? So I go over to Caesar's Palace, and Dave Rogers says to me, "Yeah, this will be great. I'll take it down and give it to Sinatra Sound Man. You wait here in the sound booth. This will be cool." So I'm in the sound booth. I'm 100 feet away from the stage about. Dave walks down to the stage, and I see this animated conversation going on between Dave Rogers and the Sinatra Sound Man, a guy named Hank, something or other. Anyways, and eventually you see Hank kind of shrug his shoulders, take the SM59, walk over to the wired SM58, which Sinatra is going to use, and unplug the 58, plugs the 59 on, and, everything's cool. So Dave walks back up to the sound booth. He goes, he's going to try it. It's going to be great. Okay. Sinatra walks out. He's joking with the band, as always does. He turns around, and he doesn't see his favorite microphone there, which was an SM58. He turns to Hank, and he goes, "Where's my friendly SM58?" Which, of course, he didn't use friendly, but you can imagine what he said. Hank says, "Oh, this is a new mic from Shure, Frank. Would you try it out? They just want you to try it." So Sinatra kind of goes, all right. So his first tune, always, was "Come Fly With Me." He counts off the band. He sings about 8 bars, and that's exactly what happened to the microphone. He takes it off the stand, and he throws it as hard as he can, stage left, bounces along on stage, boom, 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 hits the wall, and he goes, "Get me my 58. So Hank, the sound man, runs over, picks up the 59, unplugs it, plugs in the 58, puts it back on the stand. Sinatra's happy, and he puts the 59 in his pocket. So rehearsal goes on, everything's calmed down. Hank comes up to the sound booth about 5 minutes later, finds me there cowering in a corner, hands me the SM59 and says very quietly, he didn't like it. And I took the microphone and I got out there as fast as I could. And all I was thinking all the way back is, what am I going to tell my boss? What am I going to tell my boss? So now, in hindsight, I wrote a tech tip about this event, and I listed all the reasons that the SM59 was absolutely the wrong microphone for Frank Sinatra. Now I know that. Back then, I just didn't know enough of microphones to make that, intelligent decision. So that was my one encounter with Mr. Blue Eyes, and that was close enough for me.
Lived through it.
Lived to tell about it.
I'll give a quick joke. There's a Shecky Green and Frank Sinatra. They were at odds all the time, and Shecky Green's doing a show, and he walks out on stage. He goes, "I know everybody here knows that, that Frank and I don't get along, but I just want to tell you something right now. Frank Sinatra saved my life last night." He goes, "My show was over. I was walking out the back door. 2 of Frank's goons were beating the snot out of me. And Frank walks down the alley and says, 'Okay, that's enough.'"
Yeah. So that was my encounter. He was a fairly loyal SM58 user. I've seen him with the Beta 58. I've seen him with a lot of different microphones, but SM53 early in the 70s was another one as well. But that was my close encounter with Mr. Sinatra, Michael.
You talk about him plugging it in. When did the SM58 make its way onto the first wireless microphone where that capsule was being used?
It wasn't ours. We in the 70s, we were selling SM58s by the basketful to different manufacturers making wireless microphones.
No.
Some manufacturers, HME, Edcore, Swintech, companies which Vega was another one.
Yeah.
And so we had exited the wireless microphone business in 1960 when we had our Vagabond, and we got out of that because that was actually a vacuum tube transmitter, and it wasn't very reliable. And Mr. Shure didn't like the fact that we were making a product that was not considered reliable. I mean, it was all about reliability was all about his thing. So we started doing these OEM things. We were selling SM58 heads to these other manufacturers. Sometime in the early 83, 84, someone at Shure, probably Sandy Schroeder, looked at that and said, "Wow, look at all these microphone heads that we're selling to wireless microphone manufacturers." And our OEM people says, "Isn't that great?" And Sandy or someone else says, "That means we're not selling a wired microphone or a Shure wireless microphone in place of it." And it dawned upon us that we had better get into that business fairly quick.
Very smart.
Yes. So our first wireless system, modern wireless system, was a joint venture between Telex and Shure. It was called the Shure Wireless. It came out around 1987. It was a single channel VHF system that was like $1,800 back then, right? And that's when we also decided to stop selling SM58s to other manufacturers. And boy, did they whine and cry and so forth. But that was our ace in the hole. Why would we take a great technology that's got the Shure name on it and make it available to our competitors?
The SM58 is the legendary durable microphone. You know, there's the legendary videos of the microphone being dropped out of helicopters and hammer and nails and all. Do you have a favorite durability story?
Yeah, there's a lot of them. The one I like was, I think, when there was a 58 that was found on a Canadian highway and had been like run over for like 2 weeks. and one guy, this guy saw it every day. He drove back and forth, and he just sees it lying on his side and getting flatter and flatter and so forth. And eventually he picks it up, stops and picks it up, and it worked fine. And he sent it back to us. Of course, we sent him a new one. But they've been through fire, they've been through floods, being run over. I mean, part of the trick, of course, is the grill being. That's a crumple zone, just like a crumple zone on a car is. And so when you drop it and it dents, it takes some of the impact of it. But really, there's nothing there's nothing much in there. You got one moving part essentially. You get the voice coil, and it moves a millionth of an inch, and as long as you can keep that aligned, it's going to continue to work. Fire, flood, famine, they just seem
virus.
They seem to work. Dumping them into the water and shaking them out and so forth. It's pretty hard to kill them. But the only thing that would really eventually get to it is if you've got enough grit into the gap where the voice coil moves, that would stop it eventually. But it's hard to get anything in there because it's such a tight fit, and you're surrounded by foam and everything else. It helps a great deal. So,
do you see a lot of counterfeits out there? I mean, most people struggle with that. Does Shure have a way of making it so it's not that easy to reproduce? And what do you guys do to keep that on the minimum?
One of the things we do is a lot of improvements we make, we don't patent. We keep them as trade secrets. So when you keep them as trade secrets, you don't have to reveal anything to anybody. So that's one thing we do. We have a trademark on the term SM58, so that if anybody uses that term, like on counterfeits, it's very easy for us to stop them immediately because it's trademark infringement rather than patent infringement. And the patent ran out years ago on that. But it's really difficult. And the biggest issue is losing the sale is bad enough, but really what you're most concerned about is here's a person, and they buy a counterfeit SM58 and they don't know it's counterfeit, and it's a bad product. And what does that do to the brand? That's the biggest issue, Jeff, more than anything else. So we spend a lot of time hunting them down and shutting them down, but they just pop up elsewhere. I tell people, what's the best way to avoid it? Buy from a dealer is a legitimate Shure dealer. There are legitimate Shure dealers on eBay, but there's a lot of them that aren't. And if you see something is too good to be true as far as the price goes, guess what? There's a reason. People always say, well, how can I tell a counterfeit? We don't release that because as soon as you release it, the counterfeiters are going to find it.
Right.
I got to change that. No, I got to change this. And so forth. It's most of the time, a lot of it will run down to the graphics are never as good. It's just like you look at it, and if the graphics are smeary and the data sheet's got the wrong date on it and like that, those are all things that they overlook.
I've seen my share of them over the years, and it's amazing because some of them are just downright bad. Yep. And you think like, if you knew anything, you wouldn't be buying this thing. But yeah, it's like you said, if it's too good to be true, it is.
Counterfeit Shure condenser microphones are a little bit easier to find because they always work without phantom power.
Oh, that would make sense.
Because we're really good.
They're putting dynamic elements in it.
Right.
And that was always when I was in applications. So I got this really weird Shure mic. It's a condenser mic, but it works without phantom power. And go,
That's not a Shure mic.
That's not a Shure mic. But we spend a lot of money chasing that stuff down. And it's primarily to protect the brand and secondary to protect sales. But the brand image is by far harder to get back than lost sales.
So you're currently making them in Mexico, right?
And I think we're making them in China too.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. We're doing more and more duplication in the Mexican facility and the China facility, primarily so you don't be single sourced. When the COVID thing happened, the China plant was back in action probably within 3 or 4 weeks. Mexican facility was shut down even longer. So we're learning more and more that we got to have multiple sources of them. We started building them in Mexico in the 1980s. And I always like to say, those are Shure facilities with Shure employees. They just happen to be in a different country. It's not an outsourced thing. And we found the product quality has actually gone way up since building them there, as far as rejects and so forth. And so it's been a really great thing overall for the product quality.
Not that far from the U.S. to that factory, I'm sure. You know,
Yeah.
you could
It's not
throw
far
a
at all.
baseball and you're in the
Right.
U.S. anyway. So
Yep.
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, the current pandemic has brought about a lot of talk about how one can use handheld microphones in a live situation safely so as not to do any COVID transmission. It looks like Shure just recently published new information in regards to care for, COVID transmission and sterilizing mics. How should one go about making sure their 58 isn't going to make anyone sick?
Well, we're always real careful about that because we're not medical people, right? So, we don't have the ability to do tests at Shure to make sure that the COVID bacteria that we put on there as a test is dead, 2 days later. So we're always very, very, because here are the best things that we think about doing, but there's never going to guarantee it. You can do simple things like removing the balls, and you can, off the ball grills and washing them, just in soap and water and letting them dry overnight. Very, very simple things like that. Yeah, but the idea of, or putting on foam windscreens and then changing them from person to person. And again, and washing, they keep talking about washing your hands all the time will get rid of the bacteria. Well, applies to microphones as well. The one thing you probably don't want to do is, spray alcohol on them, because the alcohol, though it might help kill the bacteria, we don't know how it's going to affect the foam that's inside the grill. Soap and water, air dry them, probably a good start. But we always say, but we're not medical people, and we're not going to guarantee that that's going to be the situation.
So why do you think after 55 years, we still look at this as the industry standard live sound microphone? There's been a zillion microphones produced since this came to market. And yet, after all these years, no one's been able to unseat it. I mean, Shure has made several models after it, as well as other manufacturers. But here we are still talking about the SM58. Why do you think it is?
I like to make the comparison to Coca-Cola. The bottle feels right in your hand. The taste feels right in your mouth. There's just all these things that have come together. I mean, the rising frequency response, the presence peak that starts at 1K and goes up to about 8K. The original designer of the Unidyne 3, Ernie Seeler, hated that response peak. Oh, he wanted that thing as flat as possible. Of course, he couldn't get it. Thank God he didn't. The look of it is classic. I mean, you can look at that thing and it doesn't look like it was designed 55 years ago. Kind of like the SM7, right? The SM7 was designed in 72, and that could be made yesterday. So there's a classic look to it. It's the right weight. Michael, way before you joined Shure and Perry Mendes, we tried to bring out some lighter weight 57s and 58s. It's called the SM57 and the SM77 and SM78. We call them the light heavyweights. And
wow. Yeah, I don't remember that.
Yeah, and they sounded pretty much the same, but they didn't feel the same. They didn't have the same heft. And there's sometimes you just get the weight right, the look right, and the sound right. And then you get the reputation of you can't kill them. I always tell people, who are, oh, you work in microphones. Yeah, what should I buy? I said, if you buy an SM58 and you treat it right, you never have to buy another microphone for your entire life.
Yeah.
Here's a fun fact about the SM77s, as I recall, Michael, you would know, I think. They came in black and white as well, didn't they?
Yeah, black and kind of a tan.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And they had a suede coat to them too.
Yes, it was called suede coat. And it was a paint that when you held it in your hand, it felt kind of like suede. It was a little weird. So by the way, the tan ones got very dirty very quickly from off of your hand. But what we didn't realize is that after about 4 or 5 years, the suede coat would actually start to peel off. Much like you get a really bad sunburn and you're peeling like the skin off like that. And eventually we went away from that and went to just painting them tan and black, and then we got rid of them. The most famous photo of that microphone is Ronald Reagan's inauguration, where he has a black SM78 in his hand because it matched his tuxedo.
Is there an official name for the SM58 color? Is there an industrial official name for that color? Because it's black, sort of.
Like a Pantone color, No,
yeah.
I'm sure there is probably a Pantone number, something or other.
Yeah.
But the original version, if you look at the microphones in the 60s and 70s, they were two-tone. There was a dark gray base coat, and then there was a spatter black. There was like a spatter black thing, like almost like a stucco thing put over it.
Yep.
Yeah, and that was just a styling thing. Eventually, we got rid of that because it was an extra step. We just decided to make them all gray, probably in the 70s, somewhere, save a little bit of money. The other weird thing about the original one was it was dual low impedance, 38 ohms and 150 ohms. That was unusual. And also, it had a step down at where the XLR connector. The handle suddenly, for the last quarter inch, went to a smaller diameter. And no one could ever figure out what that was for. It was just a styling aspect of it. So if you see an original one, it'll be two-toned, dual impedance, and have this little smaller diameter of a handle by the XLR connector. And that basically means it's a 60s or early 70s version.
I've said this many times. I've been with SK McDonald for 22 years now. And back looking in the days when I was working in a music store doing the buying, the other microphone manufacturers all had a mic that was targeted against the SM58. And they all would come in and they'd say, well, it's just like an SM58, it's this, but it's just like an SM58. And I remember even back then thinking, well, why don't we just sell the SM58? You know what I mean? Why do I have to bother with this other thing?
I remember Electro Voice had some success for a while with their neodymium mics, because they were 4 dB louder because of the stronger magnetic field, and they would take the average person and take the two microphones and talking to this one, and this one was louder than that one, therefore it was better. Well, you could also have done the same by just cranking the gain like a half a notch. But hey, well, whatever. I mean, I don't know I haven't seen an Electro Voice microphone for years. I think they still make them, but boy, they used to be like one of our biggest competitors, and now I don't even know if anybody gives them a second thought anymore.
Yeah.
Yeah, I remember the pitch from them when I was in retail. They would take the grill off the microphone and put it on the ground and stomp on it. Says, see, it doesn't crumple like an SM58. Well, yeah, no kidding.
Yeah, but when they first came out, they gave us fits. They were all the rage for a while.
Mm-hmm.
And it took us a little while to get beyond that. But I remember when they had that little turtle microphone carousel thing in the music stores and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And were they one of the worst, Perry, as far as sales when they came out with that? Was that did that one hurt the most?
I would say that hurt a little bit, but really I think it was the ATM 63 and the ATM 41.
Yeah.
They were the 57, 58. I think those part numbers are correct. But anyway, those two, because AT did a wonderful job of getting those things seated because the deals were incredible. And after a while, that just kind of stopped too.
Yeah, they're not leaving the retailers; they're just sitting there and piled up in the back. Yeah,
right.
Yeah. It's just it's an amazing microphone that just continues to have legs no matter what. And then then we've got the SM7 now. God, I mean that's the craziest story ever. With that microphone idled for 35 years and then took off. All of this stuff goes back to Ben Bauer. This is all stuff he created in the 30s, and we're still living off of it.
Yeah. Do you think he had any idea that it was going to be as important a development, the directional microphone element?
Yeah, I think he did, but I don't think he would realize it would be, lasting this long. I mean, his uniphase network, which makes a single element directional, is pretty much used in, if I have to guess, 98% of the directional microphones in the entire world. So axiomatic to how it works that everybody just uses it. That's one guy that I wish I was smart enough when I started, because he died in '79, so he was only alive 3 years after I joined the industry, and I had only heard of the name. But that's one guy I really wish I had met. And I discover new things about him every day. I just discovered the other day his first Shure patent. I thought I knew what his first Shure patent is, but I was wrong. So that's what's cool about the history thing, is that I'm always digging. In fact, here's my latest quest, guys. If anybody knows, I'm trying to find out why in the world did the microphone industry adopt the 5/8" 27 thread for all of our adapters and mic stands? Where the heck did that weird thread come from? No one seems to know, and I'm going to keep digging until I find
That's a good question, and I'll be curious because I certainly, never obsessed over it, but I always wondered, like, where did this come from and why?
It goes back to the 30s. You will find
kidding.
Oh yeah, you'll find it in the 30s. So I'm thinking it was like maybe it was used for like floor lamps or telephone.
War surplus. Maybe it was war surplus.
I don't know. Well, that was before World War II.
That was before. Yeah, it was in the 30s. So I don't know.
So I've been asking all the vintage microphone collectors I know, where did this 5/8 27 go? And everybody's scratching their heads. So
one of the big SM58 questions is where do they all go? They don't break, and we sell more every year.
Got me, man. I've got one. I bought it in 1974. I never replaced it. They're not going into my house. I don't know, Jeff. It's just astonishing.
Yeah,
I don't have an answer to that, but thank God that
drumsticks break, guitar strings break, SM58s, they don't break, and yet you just keep selling them all day long.
Right, and if you do break, you send it back to Sure Service, and for a reasonable price, they give you another one.
Right.
Maybe they're being used in ballasts and ships. Maybe it was the SM58s that shifted in that ship and blocked the Suez Canal because of all the 58s that shifted in the bottom of it.
Perry, was there ever a time in your career where it looked like, okay, it's over, where the SM58 thing is over? They're starting the sales are starting to go down. No.
I mean, again, there are microphones that come out and, keep us sharp, but no, not even like, oh my gosh, what are we going to do now type of thing. No, never, not even once.
Jeff and Michael, Perry knows this one, but this is a story I love. So we were talking about the neodymium, right, from Electric Voice. And when Shure's answer to that was the Beta 58, which came out in 1989. But what you don't know is what the Beta 58 was going to look like. So Jim Cogan, our president at the time, decides to hire a guy named Mort Goldshaw, who was a famous industrial designer here in Chicago. And he did the Motorola Batwing logo, that they still use, right?
Yeah.
And he did like the 7-Up logo with the girl with the bubbles coming up. And this guy was big, right? But he was not into the audio industry, or was not he was more a logo designer or a font designer, but he had a contact with Mr. Shure, and so we're going to hire Mort to design the Beta 58. Okay, so Mort goes away and he comes in proudly with his Beta 58, right? And I'm in this meeting, and here's what it is. It's an SM58, got the gray handle with a bright chrome ball grill. And around the equator where the blue band is now are orange polka dots.
I voted no.
and I'm looking at this thing like, and our president, Jim Cogan, a lovely man for many reasons, who's also colorblind, says this is the greatest thing I've ever seen. They're gonna love this, and Mort Goldshaw like this, and Cogan's like this, and then the younger guys are going. and Cogan says, we paid a lot of money for the design. This is the way we're going. And we finally convinced them to let us at least take a few examples out and show them to the reps and show them to Manny's Music and show them the Clare Brothers. And we were just laughed out of the place wherever we went, right? And fortunately, they saved us for that. So how did it get to be what it was there? Well, actually, I can take a little credit for that. The blue band around it came from the blue stripe that was on the front of all of our mixer products. If you go back and look at our FP mixers, our AMS mixer, like that. So we took the blue band from that, right, and replaced the polka dots like that because it helped tie the two lines together. And then we took that blue band and just found another blue color that went well with it, which is the Beta Blue. And that's what we ended up doing.
I remember when that mic came out because I was working at a retailer, and Bobby D was our rep, and he came in and he was showing it to us, and Shure ran a promo where if you were a sales guy, when you sold 6 of them, they gave you one. So that's all you had to say to me and anybody else at the store at the time. So we did quite well with them. And I still have one of those originals at home that, I don't know, what was, you said 89? It was probably from that year that they gave me because I sold them, and
now if you had an original Beta 57.
Yeah, those were cool.
Cool grill. Oh, that thing was.
And that grill was based upon the 548 grill, which was the Unidyne 4. And the reason that we quit making that grill was, number one, it was brutally expensive to make it, horribly expensive. And whenever you hit with your drumstick, it would go bing, bing.
It was the coolest looking microphone I had ever seen.
Yeah. But it was just way expensive, and drummer, they can't figure it out. They're drumming along, and of course, the pitch had nothing to do with the song, right? You kept hearing this. Bing.
Well, if you could tune it into the key of the song, you might have had some success.
But go back and look at a model 548 from the late 1960s, early 70s, Unidyne 4, and that's what the grill was based on. Well, the Beta grill was based on. That's just a variation on that.
So where do we go from here, Michael?
Well, see, fortunately, my job is just looking backwards. That's easy. Here's one prediction I made that was true, because having been there for a long time, being a lot of ups and downs, as Perry has been there as well, there was a lot of younger people, even the executive staff, that was really concerned about what was going to happen during this pandemic. And I said, I tell you one thing: when times like this happen, there's a flight to quality. People want to buy stuff that's going to last. I said, and that's got to help us. And boy, hasn't that proven to be true?
Yeah.
Times are tough or times are uncertain. I don't think I'm going to try that XYZ microphone because they're brand new and like that. I'm going to use something that I know is going to last and stand behind it. So things like that help us. The whole thing of microphones with multiple elements in it, like all the array microphones and so forth, that's just that blows me away with what we can do with that. You're going to see a lot more with that. You guys have probably seen that in Ben Bauer's lab notebooks from 1938, there was an array microphone with multiple elements.
Yeah, he was. The more you write about him, the more fascinated I become. He was something else.
And the patent I was talking about before, if we were having this conversation a month ago, I would have told you, Ben Bauer's first patent was for the Unidyne microphone. The Uniphase microphone came out in 1941. So recently, I was at home one day. I said, look through old patents. 1939, Benjamin Baumschweiger, his original name, his real first patent for the Shure was our tripolar crystal mic, a KSM 44A as a crystal in 1939. And he applied for that patent within less than 1 year after he started working at Shure. So he started working for Shure full-time in 1937, and sometime in 1937 he applied for the patent that came through in 1939. That's how far back our KSM 44 ideas go, back to Ben in 1937 coming up with this tripolar idea. Unbelievable.
Did any of Ben's family find their way into the industry?
No, but I got to tell you, the Bauer family is the highest performing family I've ever met in my life. If you don't have a PhD, they don't even allow you to work for that family.
You don't go to the family picnic unless you're a doctor. Get out of here.
It's just astonishing.
Go get coffee.
I mean, his two sons. His son is a root. And by the way, they're sons, but they're 80 and 70. They're still out practicing. One's a root canal specialist. The other one's a psychiatrist. The grandkids are all doctors and lawyers. And one of his granddaughters was in the biosphere for 2 years. And she is probably a future astronaut. It's just amazing. So though I never got to meet Ben, the whole family came to Shure in 2014 when we won the IEEE Milestone Award for the Uniphase. Right. So I got the two sons, and I said, let's go sit in a room and let's talk about your dad for like 2 hours. And so I've got a recording of that. Right. And just what it was like growing up with them. Bauer was a 4 hours a night guy. He'd come home, he'd eat. He'd work, he'd go to sleep for 4 hours, get out in the middle of the night and invent all night. He was just that type of guy. So my favorite story from the entire thing, I've got both of the sons there. And I said, now your dad was born in the Ukraine. And by the time he was 16, he was in the United States, and he spoke like 5 languages. And I've heard him talk. And I've seen his written English, and it's absolutely perfect, even though English was his fifth language, right?
Overachiever.
Right. And I said, how could it be? His English diction was perfect. His writing was perfect. And one of his sons says, Dad was kind of smart. Something in the family would be a good biography or something like that.
You need to write a book.
You know, I did write a book. I'm the co-author of a book about the guitarist Freddie Green, Count Basie's guitarist, okay. Who's probably more famous than Ben Bauer. I can tell you, there's no money in it. We've sold tens and tens of these books worldwide. I'd rather do a webinar about people, and the interesting people, but the general gist about Ben Bauer, I don't think that would ever make a bestseller by any means. Was
he an intern or recommended by one of his college professors? Or
yeah, so this is one of those little tiny thin strings that if it was broken, none of us would be sitting here right now. So it's the mid-30s, it's depression, right? And Mr. Schur is trying to figure out how to get some inexpensive engineering labor. So he talks to a guy named Ralph Glover, and Ralph Glover was our first chief engineer. And Ralph Glover, thank God, had gone to the University of Cincinnati, which had, at the time, one of the few electrical engineering schools in the entire country. And Ralph says, well, let me write my professors. So he writes his professor. This is like December 1935, saying, you got any graduate students or anybody else that might be interested in microphones? And he gets a letter back a week later. This is when actually post offices work quickly, right? And the professor says, nice to hear from you, Ralph. Nah, no graduate students, but we got this young guy named Benjamin Baumsweiger, who's a junior, and he's top in his class, and you might be interested in him. And so within 2 weeks of that letter came out, they pay for Bauer to come up by bus from Cincinnati to Chicago to interview with Mr. Schur and Glover, and they're blown away by this guy. So they hire him as a co-op student, $15 a week. and he does 8 weeks at Schur, 8 weeks at school, 8 weeks at Schur, 8 weeks at school, and finishes up his undergraduate degree. And as soon as he's finished up, they're already want to hire him, because if you look at his lab notebook, all you got to do is the first day on the job, right? He's working at a microphone to listen to heartbeats. And in his first day on his job, you read all the notes, and he's already, in a very subtle way, criticizing Ralph Glover's research. No, it doesn't really work like that.
The young punk comes in and,
He was just unbelievably brilliant. And every day you read through these notebooks, and every day there's a new invention. There are things in there about lenses. There are things in there about how to put a transducer on the side of a dam to be able to figure out the water pressure on the other side of the dam. I mean, it's not just about microphones. It's just about anything that has to do with pressure and waves. This guy was interested in. Yeah, it was the most thrilling time of my entire career, I think, is when I got my hands on those notebooks. They had been lost for 60 years, and got to read through page by page by page and document what was in it. It was like reading Einstein.
Where were the notebooks for 60 years?
Offsite storage. We have about 500 boxes in offsite storage. That when we moved from downtown Chicago to Evanston, they packed up all these boxes. There wasn't any room in Evanston, so they put them in offsite storage, and we've been paying for that storage for 60-some years. And eventually, the financial department says, well, we should look at these boxes. First of all, they want to throw them all out, right? Well, we haven't looked at them for 60 years.
Maybe look at getting a bigger space.
Yeah. And I said, no, we're not going to throw them out without us looking at them. So we started this, in 2016, and of course, things get delayed and so forth. But we randomly pulled 10 boxes, just random. And the second box I looked into, those notebooks were just waiting to be discovered.
The second box out of 500.
Yeah, and they were just pulled randomly.
That's worth a bottle of wine too.
Man, I gotta tell you. So now those notebooks are locked up in my office, all scanned, right?
Yeah.
All scanned.
So you're like, I'm done. I'll leave the other 498 boxes to the rest of you then.
Well, it was one of those things where, I love my job so much I wouldn't want to quit, but it's one of those things where I wanted to go in and go to Chris Schwing, here you go. Thank you very much, everyone. I'm out of here. Because I don't think I ever could top finding those notebooks. they're just astonishing. You know, all hand drawn, all handwritten. Oh man, they're so cool.
Well, thank you. This has just been
awesome.
incredible. So we're gonna have to get you back.
Oh, I'm happy to.
And do. I don't know. I don't know how we're going to top this one. This was just great. Perry, thanks for joining us as well.
You're welcome.
This was great.
I'm just one office over, so it was easy.
Thank you so much,
All right,
everybody.
everyone. Thanks.
All right,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Thanks.
See ya.
Yeah.
Bye.